How to
means
configure the
the
job?
okay, the cab approval you're asking?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Tab approval.
It's the
Yes.
change advisory board.
Yes.
Okay, so that is done by platform team. So basically, they want to know the changes which you are uh, deploying from different environments, like from dev to QA, QA to prod, pre-prod, like that. So that is the reason you're asking for the automation, the approval, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
So when I will schedule the uh, Jenkins job, but
Mm.
it will go for an approval. If they approve, then only the schedule job will run. If
Okay.
they don't approve, then it will be cancelled. Yeah.
Yeah, got it, got it. So in your automation, we need to call the environment API calls in your Jenkins automation. During approval, we need to configure their names. Once they approve, then only that uh, build will go to deploy to the other environments. That's how we do the approval checks in the Jenkins. So basically, they have controlled Jenkins. So in the script they have written, maybe you can check in Jenkins file somewhere they have written. Basically, that will be in libraries. So nobody will write directly in the Jenkins file. They will keep it in library, and they will point to Jenkins file if the deployment wants to go to the QA, go for an approval. That's how they have written a script
So
in the Jenkins
this
file.
one, I mean, you said libraries, right? It will be a shared library which will be
Yeah,
in Jenkins.
shared library, exactly. Shared library.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, I googled it actually, but I will check once again. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the internal organization data will not get it in Google or maybe any AI tool. We need to dig more into. We need to connect with platform team. We need to schedule a meeting with them, and we need to understand that.
Okay, Sandeep. Yeah.
But that is normally will be in the shared libraries. So they have a control of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So any questions? Any questions, guys? Why this guy? Rohit and Omar Sharif. Omar is joined, okay. See, only 15 candidates. Give me a minute, please. Okay, so let's start with uh, okay, let me share my screen. So let's give some of the details on the Kubernetes installation and further concepts in Kubernetes. Okay, so let me share my screen. Able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So here you can see the Kubernetes cluster installation part, right? So you need prerequisites to install Kubernetes. You will be having 2 CPUs and more, 2 GB of free memory, 20 GB of free disk. Your out of memory should be 20 GB, and Docker should be installed because Kubernetes uses the Docker platform where we create our Docker images, right? So where we deploy, where we use our Docker container runtime in the Kubernetes cluster, right? As per the Kubernetes architecture. So Docker should be installed, but your server size should be 20 GB. You go with the, uh, just a sec. You go with the T2 2x large. Okay. So when you create this, you will get a memory issue. So you should be careful on when you're creating it. But to work on Kubernetes, we need this. Okay. So I have created, uh, let it be like we'll have to learn it in a free trial version, right? So let it be. So if your ID is blocked also, you can use the different email and different card to create an account again and to work on further tools. Okay. But we need to learn this, right? We wanted to know that until your approval, they will not debit any from money from you. Okay, keep in mind. Uh, don't be scared when you get an email from AWS saying you are getting a billing and you reached more than 80% of your free trial. They are suggesting us to do the pay as you go. Don't do that. Use as much as possible until they block your account. Basically, they will block your account to log into this ID. Okay. Similarly, you can have a different Gmail only to create an AWS account. Use a different card. So it will debit only for 2 rupee. Getting my point. Again, we'll work on free trial for another 40 hours, right? 45. 40 hours.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Hmm. So we'll create one more and we'll work on that. Okay. So Amruta, currently I'm using your account with
Yes,
T2 2x large VM, means the instance. So here I have installed Docker and also let me increase the font size. Appearance change, go to 18, apply. Okay. Now, so I'll check the Docker version. Okay. So that, oh, Docker hyphen version. Okay. Docker is installed with a version called 28.3. And similarly, we'll check the Docker status, whether it is running or not. Sudo systemctl status Docker, correct? Yes. Now this Docker is inactive and it is running. Okay. Now to work with Kubernetes cluster, okay, you need a Docker installed here. And as I said, we need some prerequisites. Okay. So I do have 2 CPUs, 20 GB free. I took the 32 GB of disk space of server, which is 2x large, which is this. Okay. The instance type you can see. You can also follow the same. And Docker is installed. Okay. I have pulled this repo to this server. This server, I have already downloaded this repository from GitHub, and here is the Minikube cluster, which is provided from the Kubernetes, which we wanted to work. on the Kubernetes cluster. See, Minikube is a cluster which is provided from the Kubernetes community. Okay, so we will install Minikube in the server and we will work on that. Okay. Okay, so I have downloaded this repo. Yeah, I'm going to just run this sudo install minikube. I'll explain this command once soon after installation of this. Okay, minikube. Okay, I need to go and download this repo again. Basically, curl-lo is used to download the Kubernetes Minikube repository, which is for Linux of the architecture AMD 64. Okay, I'm just downloading this repository into the server. Okay, I'm just downloading using curl. You can also use wget. If not getting, use curl. Okay, yes. Now I'm downloaded the repo. Then after downloading, it's a complete package, the build. Okay, and after downloading, I'm gonna run sudo install Kubernetes Linux. See, this is the command to install Minikube under this. And if there are, okay, the repo that we downloaded is for Minikube Linux AMD 64, correct? Correct, right? So let's run this. Okay, now after installing this Minikube Linux AMD 64, if it is existing, it will delete. Okay, here we are going to call Minikube Linux AMD 64, right? And let's start the Minikube. Okay, Minikube start. It should give the cluster. Here you are able to see the output, right? When we run Minikube start. You guys are with me?
Yes, Sandeep.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Now what it is saying, what it is saying,
kubectl not found.
kubectl not found means we will set it. Now kubectl is now configured to use Minikube cluster and default namespace by default. Okay. Now we'll see. Okay. So it is saying kubectl is not found, right? So currently we are in Minikube cluster. So as I said, your cluster nothing but your control plane, component of control plane and the component of node component, correct? As per the architecture, right? Now we'll go with, so what it was saying, kubectl is not found, right? So we'll set alias to, instead of minikube, we'll set a kubectl. Okay, so here is the command. So I'm gonna set alias kubectl to minikube kubectl. So wherever we need to run kubectl, minikube kubectl, instead of that, you can directly run kubectl. Okay, so I'm gonna set, I have set the minikube kubectl to kubectl. Okay, so I'll give a statement here. Kubectl is the command line interface. Kubernetes provides the command line interface or tool to communicate to the cluster's control plane. Okay, so I'll give a statement for kubectl. So I'll be using we will be using kubectl all the times. We use lot of commands and lot of automations and lot of configuration in Kubernetes. For that, we use kubectl. Okay, so what is this kubectl? Kubectl, kubectl. Okay, you need to understand before we move into the another concept. Okay. So Kubernetes provides the command line. Kubernetes provides the command line interface or tool, okay, to communicate, okay, to communicate to the cluster control plane, right? So-called kubectl. Keep in mind, remember always, whenever I'm running kubectl, represents Kubernetes provides the command line interface or tool to communicate to the cluster control plane. To communicate to the cluster or control plane. Okay. So now see, kubectl is nothing but your CLI. Okay, command line interface. Now, as I said, some of the statements I have given, right? The Kubernetes concepts, right? So I have given namespaces, correct? So what is this namespace and why do we use? So I have given the statement already. So the namespace is basically the bundle of resources to list in the Kubernetes cluster, correct? So we keep a particular name, the bunch of resources we tag in a specific name, we call it as namespaces, right? Before we configure any of the pod, any of the deployments, any of the services, we need to understand the namespace concept, right? So as I said here, I did not given the concept of namespace here, okay? So this defines the bunch or bundle of resources, okay? That is Kubernetes resources in a single name. Suppose if I create a namespace called dev, your dev namespace nothing but kind of your branch, the branching. Okay, your particular branch is having some code, right? Similarly, in Kubernetes, we do have a particular branch. We will not call it as branch here. We call it as namespaces. So the bunch of resources which we have under particular namespace, we use namespaces in Kubernetes, right? Then how do we configure that? Okay, I'll start using the Kubernetes kubectl commands now. So there is a list of commands to work in namespaces. Okay, now I'm gonna list the commands first, right? See, whatever I'm gonna explain in the sessions, those are all very, very important. Okay. Okay, let's start the services one by one. Okay, now we'll go with the namespace. So how do we list a namespace? kubectl get namespace. Okay, so kubectl get namespace to list the namespace. Okay, so let's run this. Either you can use kubectl. You were able to see my screen.
Yes, sir.
You guys are with me, right?
Yes.
kubectl get is the command to get the namespace. Namespace. Okay, so when we run this, we will get a default namespaces. Okay, here what it is saying, when we install Kubernetes in the server, it was saying kubectl not configured. If you need it, try minikube this, and it is saying kubectl is now configured to use minikube cluster and default namespaces by default. There is also a namespace called default in the default namespace. Don't get confused with with this statement. Okay, we will not touch any default namespaces. We will be having the dedicated namespaces to deploy our resources. Okay, now I'm gonna run this command. So are we getting the namespaces here? So what are all the default namespaces which is already existing? It is default kube node lease, kube public, kube system. You are able to see these namespaces.
Yes, sir.
So these are all the namespaces which is readily available in the cluster, but we will not touch these namespaces in the default in the cluster These are all the default one. Okay. Now how do we check that we are in which namespace, right? For that, there is a command called kubectl. Okay. Kubectl config. Okay. View space followed by hyphen minify. Okay. Let's run this. So kubectl config view, just we are viewing the configuration that we're in which namespace. Okay. Now if I run this, so it will give in terms of YAML format. Okay. So we are in which namespace, where we can see under namespace here, what it was showing. We are under default namespace, correct? Correct, right?
Yes.
You guys are with me, at least you are able
Yes.
to see the screen.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I wanted to know from you that you're understanding the concept that I'm going to guide here. Okay, now suppose similarly, if you want to know the particular line to be printed, put pipe, grep, what namespace, right? What you are seeing here, you are currently in default namespace, right? So remember that always when you run kubectl get ns, you can point shortcut to list the namespaces. You are having always default namespaces in your Kubernetes cluster, in your Kubernetes configuration. We will not touch these default namespaces. Always we'll be having the default, always we'll be having the dedicated namespaces to be created. And we're going to do the deployments. We do our configuration in Kubernetes. Complete, will be having our pod creation, pod spin up, deployment, services, each and every point we do with our customized namespaces. Okay. Now we got to know that we are in the default namespace, the default branch, right? See, why I'm pulling the branch here is to make you understand. Don't get confused with the Git branch with the Kubernetes namespace. Okay. Now, how do we create a namespace, right? So these are all the namespaces which are created default and which is readily available. We don't want to use that. Now, how do we create a namespace? There is a command in, I'll give a statement for this. Use to check that which namespace that we are in, which namespace that we are in. Okay, so I'll give it this way. Okay, now how do we create a namespace? kubectl, there is a command called kubectl. Here we use a lot of commands, kubectl. So as I said, kubectl provides the command and interface to communicate to the cluster control plane. You need to understand this clearly. Okay, now let's give a command to create a namespace. kubectl create, right? Create ns followed by the namespace name. Okay, followed by the namespace name. Okay, so kubectl ns represents namespace. Either I'll give this way. You are able to understand this, right? Either you can point ns or
Yes.
the complete name called namespace. Okay, now here is a command to create a namespace, to create a namespace. Okay, now let's run this command. Okay, now see, remember that when we run kubectl get ns, we are getting these 4 default namespaces. We don't want to use those default namespaces which is for our inbuilt cluster. Okay, we wanted to have the dedicated namespaces to be created. Okay, now I'm gonna run kubectl create ns. I'll keep it as dev because we will be having the different environments like, right, dev, QA, UAT, or pre-prod, we call it as UAT, user acceptance test, and the prod, right? Now I'm gonna run this command. what you can see here, namespace /dev created, correct? Correct, right? Now, what I'll do, I'm gonna run kubectl get ns command. It will list along with the default namespaces, right? So here you can see that dev namespace is created, right? Now, how do we check that we're in which namespace? As I said, minify, right? kubectl config view minify, control R hyphen minify followed by grep namespace. Okay, before running this, you just run, else you can also point grep so that you will get easily instead of going with somewhere with a YAML format, right? Namespace. Okay, we are in default namespace, correct? Now, how do we switch that dev namespace from default to dev namespace? Right? So there is a command in Kubernetes to switch between the namespaces. Okay, so I'll give it a command here, kubectl config set hyphen context text. Okay, context followed by hyphen current. Okay, hyphen namespace is equals to what? Point the namespace name. Got it? You getting this command? We are switching the namespaces by using this command. You need to remember a lot of commands here. You need to work a lot of kubectl commands. But before moving to it, you need to understand properly what we are doing here. We have created we installed Kubernetes and created a namespace. Before creating, we check the namespace that we are in default, and we created a namespace. Now we are switch between the namespaces. To switch between the namespaces, there is a command called cubes. Understand this command, okay? See, whatever the concept that you're learning newly, you need to understand the basic concept, right? So what it is saying, kubectl, we are setting a config set context, right? To current, right? Hyphen current to the namespace of the name of namespace here. Okay. Now I'm gonna run this in the command line, right? So you are able to see the screen, right? And this, yeah. So here instead of ns, so what is our newly created namespace that we created, which is dev, correct? I'm gonna point it here. You are able to see here. So what you can see, context minikube modified means we have switched the namespaces from default to dev. How do we check? Use control shortcuts, control R, use what? Minify, right? Hyphen minify. Instead of that, you can use grep. Grep namespace. Okay, I think I'm not able to find that command. Control R. It is above only. I wanted to search it from shortcut. Okay. So what I'll do, yes, this is the command, right? So to check that we are in which namespace, I'm gonna run here kubectl config view minify grep namespace. Is it changed? It is changed from default to dev.
Yes.
You were able to understand this.
Yes, sir.
Now
Yes.
we are switching between the namespaces, right? So we created a namespace and we are switching between the namespaces, right? Now, if okay, I'll give this command so that you can identify easily. ns instead of this can use, okay? This is pipe grep namespace. Sorry, not this. Here. Config wave the namespace, okay? used to switch between the namespaces. Okay. So instead of NS, you can point your namespace name and you can have switch, basically the branch switching. Okay. Don't get confused. I'm saying again and again, the branch is different. To make you understand, I'm pulling the branch here. Means we will be having some bunch of resources in the namespaces, right? That's why. So we're going to use the namespaces concept here. Okay. Now, so how do we create the names resources in the namespace, right? So as I said, pods, right? So we do spin up a pod. So as per the Kubernetes architecture, pod is a component of node, correct? So and also I have given pod is a package of containerized application. It has own storage, own network ID, own IP address that runs on the container, right? So before moving to that, so I'll give all the namespace command to make you understand. Okay. So here is the command to create an namespace. Similarly, there should be a command to delete also, right? Correct, right? So how do we create? How do we delete? kubectl delete ns followed by the namespace. Correct, right? So wherever you're learning a command, there should, if there is a command to create, it means there should be always to command available to delete it, right? Correct, right? Used to delete the ns. Okay. Now, I'm going to switch to the pods. So, any questions and anything that you want to understand from this namespace commands? There are a lot of commands in namespace. Wherever it is necessary, I'm going to guide you on that particular concept only so that you will get a clarity. Now, if I give complete bunch of commands, you will get confused with each and every concept. Okay. Any doubts and any questions in these commands? Guys, at least
No,
can speak someone.
No, Sandeep.
no, Sandeep.
Okay. Okay. Now I'll switch to the pods. So as I said, pods is an containerized application. It has own storage and also it has the own configuration, own IP address, right? Before moving to the pods command to play around in cluster, we need to understand some of the concept, right? So we need to understand some concept, means the configuration, that how do we do and what do we call and what we contain inside the pod and what we need to write, right? So pod okay, so I'll give a statement this way. So we use YAML format to create a pod. Okay, so we use YAML. Okay, we use all the configuration in YAML format only for a pods, your deployment, your services, your stateful set, all the services we use to create in YAML format. Keep in mind. Okay, so we use YAML format to create a pod. See, some of the definitions I'm giving here that you should not tell in front of the interviewers. Okay, you can keep it yourself. And you can also give it this. Okay, we will be using YAML format to create a pod after saying the statement of this. Okay, there will be some configuration in YAML format. Again, they'll start asking what is YAML, and based on your statement only, they'll ask a question. Okay, so as I said, we use YAML format to create a pod, right? So what are those sections in YAML format? right? So the very first parameter, which is API version, right? So what is our Kubernetes architecture says? The kube API version, right? So where it, the architecture, this, right? So here, the API server, right? The main pillar of the Kubernetes is API server, right? So it will talk to API server, and the version of APIs we use as very first line in the pod configuration. Okay, what it represents, the version of Kubernetes that we define in the manifest file. Okay, the version of Kubernetes the version of Kubernetes that we define in the manifest file. Why Rohit is not joined today? Any idea on that?
Due to some emergency, is not joined.
Okay, fine. No worries. Because I thought everyone will join today to start this concept, because this recording is not happening from yesterday. That's the reason. Okay. Anyways, so the very first config we use API version, the version of Kubernetes that we define in the manifest file. Okay. So I'll give complete layer of complete YAML config statement. Then we'll start writing a pod configuration file. Okay. Which is in YAML format. Okay. Now the second parameter that we're going to use, kind. Okay. So what this represents, kind, the name itself is saying kind, right? So the kind object that we wanted to create in Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so it's an object in the sense either it should do that you want to create an pod, either you want to create a namespace, either you want to create a deployment, either you want to create a service, right? So it's an object that we're going to define in the YAML configuration file. Okay, so the kind of object that we want to create in the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, see, kind is an object that we wanted to create in Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so that means either you are creating NS, either you are creating pod, either you're creating deployment, either you're creating services, right? So we do have the concepts, right? Pod, namespace, deployment. So under kind section, we're going to define when you're creating pod, you will have to define kind pod, right? And when you're creating services, you will have to define under kind services. And whenever you're creating a namespaces, under kind, you can point namespaces. So whenever you're creating a deployment under kind, you will have to define deployment. Okay, so called kind. It's an object. The kind the kind of object that we wanted to create in Kubernetes cluster. Okay. Now, similarly, we do have metadata. Okay. So what this defines and why do we use this metadata? Okay. The data that helps unique identification of an object. Okay. So the data that helps unique identification. The data that helps unique identification of an object, so-called metadata. Okay, we use all the parameters called API version, kind, metadata. So under metadata, the definition, the data that helps unique identification of an object. Okay, it's a unique identification. Okay, we'll see what do we write in YAML format. Okay, now we have spec, right? So what is this spec? Why do we use? the spec defines the specification of the container, right? We use Docker container in your Kubernetes cluster, right? We do containerize our application. We spin up a pod in terms of our containerized application, right? For that to create, we should define the container specification under spec. Okay, that is the reason we use the parameter or the block, we call it as spec, right? Now that defines, spec defines, I'll give it this way. This defines the, so wherever you see the spelling mistake, you can guide me also. Okay. I'm very much weak in typing. Specifications of containers. Okay. So this defines the specifications of container. Sorry, CON. Okay. So this spec section defines the specifications of container, so called the spec. Right now we have learned about the parameter that we're going to use in the YAML format, which is API version. API version in the sense your API server version, your Kubernetes complete API server version, because the API server is the pillar of our Kubernetes. So when we are configuring in YAML format, when we are configuring any of the services, any of the deployment, any concept in Kubernetes, the very first line that we use is API version. Okay. Now, how do we write the pod configuration file? Now we understood about these 4 parameters, right? So these 4 we use in when creating a pod in Kubernetes cluster, right? So we use, as I said, we use YAML format. Okay. Now let's write the pod.yaml file. Okay. So this here I'm going to start pod. To create a pod, we're going to write pod.yaml. The extension that we're going to use here in complete until we close our Kubernetes configuration, we use YAML in terms of YAML format. Okay. So what is our first line? API version, right? Copy this, put it here. Okay. What is the API version that we wanted to use? Version 1. Okay. This version 1 is your, which version? Your API version. Okay. Your API server version. Getting my point? So what is the version of Kubernetes that we are using currently? What you see here when we installed our Kubernetes cluster, preparing Kubernetes, what is our on Docker, right? What is our version? V1 only, right? Correct, right?
Yes.
So this configuration that we're going to configure in our YAML version 1 to create our pod. Okay. Now, what is our second statement? Kind, right? Copy this. Okay. So what kind that we are creating here? Colon, put a space. What kind that we are putting here? Pod, right? Pod. Let's give a pod. Now, what is our third parameter that we're going to use? Metadata, correct? Copy this. Let's increase the font size. Okay. Now, what is our third statement saying? Metadata, correct? Copy here, colon, space. See here under metadata, what I said, the data that helps unique identification of an object, right? So what data that you wanted after every object or after every component, after every layer, we would have to point tab, or we need to point to space. One is for M, one is for E. So here we need to start our configuration name. Under metadata, I'm going to call name the sample Nginx data. Okay. Nginx. See, Nginx is the metadata in our configuration currently. Okay. So instead of that, you can also have your complete other metadata also. Getting my point? So the metadata, as I said, the data that helps unique identification of an object. Here we're gonna create a pod of Nginx container. Okay, now soon after this, let's come here. Okay, then what is our fourth parameter? Spec, right? Colon. So under spec, what I said, under spec, this defines the specification of container, right? So after this, put enter. You need to provide 2 space when you are writing any YAML file. Okay. After 2 space, it should come below the E, then point container, right? Containers, right? We are providing containers configuration here, right? Now, so what is the name of container that I'm going to use here is hyphen space followed by name. Name represents the container name. So what is my container name? Under metadata, I have pointed as Nginx, right? Copy this, put it here. I'm configuring the Nginx container currently, right? Now, for this container, put a space. It should come below the name. Container should contain always the image, right? So what is the image? What is the image that we're going to use here is we need to point the image name. So in my case, my image name would be Nginx followed by the version 1.14.2. This is my image. Your container contains your image, right? Docker image, right? And after the image configuration, we need to point the ports, which port, which is the container running, followed by ports, put hyphen here, put space, it should come below the R, ports, 2 space, right? Here you can see 2 space. Okay, you need to start it from here. And the container port, okay, colon, which port? 80, right? Always all the application would be enabled with HTTP or HTTPS, right? So here I'm going to point the container port, which is 80. You were able to understand this spec? That's what I have defined here. This defines the specification of container, right? So here under spec, we're going to define containers. Under containers, we point the container name and the image name and then port name of the container. So you must observe here, there are 2 space after every parameter that I defined. So the 4th parameter I have defined here. After the 4th parameter, I have put 2 space and I started my container configuration. After containers configuration, after 2 space, I started my container name. And below that, I'm gonna see under containers, you should always point name, image name, port name should be aligned with the same. And whenever you're pointing container port, you should put a space, and that's how the YAML configuration will understand from the system. Otherwise, it will not understand when you configure, when you install this Kubernetes complete cluster, right? This only will understand in terms of YAML. Okay, that's how we need to be very careful when we are writing the YAML configuration file. Okay, now we are done with the configuration, right? So how do we deploy it in server? How do we create, right? So as I said, I am in the which namespace? So how do we check that we're in which namespace? So I'm in dev namespace, correct? Correct, right? Now,
Yes.
what I will do, I will create vi pod.iaml. Okay. So I'll directly copy from here and directly copy from here, put it in this configuration file that I've created now, insert, put it here. You were able to see this. And here you can see when you are configuring this, you can also use your VS Code. Okay. VS Code, did I install? Yes. So you can see the instead of this, I'm going to create. Okay. So instead of Jenkins file, I'm going to give this. Okay. So here you can see the nested configuration. So either you can use your VS Code or Notepad whenever you are editing or configuring the YAML configurations, either Jenkins file or you can use this. Yeah, else you can create a new file and you can use the same to check your nested way. Okay. Similarly, I have pointed here to for the pod configuration. Okay. What I will do, I'll save this control:WQ explanatory shift: run this. Okay. Now if I do cat pod.yaml, you should see this file. Okay. Now after creating, how do we deploy this? For this, there is a command in Kubernetes under pods. Okay. So I'll give the commands, pod commands here. Okay. Okay. So I'll give a list of commands first. To deploy this above YAML file, there is a command called kubectl apply -f. Okay. Kubectl apply -f followed by pod.yaml. Okay. So we are applying it, right? So kubectl apply -f followed by the pod means we are applying our YAML file into the server. Means so called the after writing our YAML configuration file, we are applying it, right? So let's run this command to create a pod. This will see as soon as we run this command, kubectl apply -f followed by pod.yaml, your pod will create of what? Nginx, right? Let's see. Let's run this command. So instead of typing, so I'm gonna run this. Okay. So kubectl apply -f pod.yaml. Let's run this. Okay. So I got an error. What is the error? We'll see. Okay. Error parsing pod.yaml, error converting YAML to JSON, YAML line number 8 found tab character that violates indentation. Okay. So it is saying line number 8. Let's count line number 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. It is saying the indentation means wherever we need to point the right parameter. If you are not pointing any right parameter over here in the Kubernetes configuration file, this services any of the pod will not be created. Okay. Let's see what is the, let's do cat the pod.yaml. Let's debug this. Okay. API version, API V should be capital, version v1 kind pod. Oh, I got it. Pod should be in, P should be in capital. Okay. Let's open vi pod.yaml. It should be in capital. Escape insert, put P as in capital, pod, kind as pod. We are creating a pods here. Yes. Spin up a pod. Okay. Now if I run, what happened?
This image should be below the name, right, sir? The image.
Yes.
But in the containers.
This nested way, anyways, oh, correct. There is also one more. Let's open. Yeah. This should be under here. This ports. Yeah, I got it. So let's move it here to here. Name, image, and then ports, and then containers should come here. Means it starts under port. Then only it will pick. Okay. Now let's save this. So when you are copying from Notepad or from anywhere now, so it will happen this way only. Let's print the pod.yaml. Okay, I think now it is nested way. Let's run this command kubectl apply -f pod.yaml, right? Now this pod is created, correct? Pod nginx. is created, right? Correct, right? Now, how do we check the created pod? Okay, there is a command to check created pod, which is kubectl get pods. Okay, now if I run kubectl get pods, so you will see the pod name under name. This is the pod name under ready 1/1. This should be always 1/1. If you see 1/0, your pod is not running. The status, it is saying running. Restarts every second, it will get restarts. Okay, the age which is created 29 seconds ago means just now we created. Correct, right? Similarly, we do have creation of pod. Right now we are in which namespace? Control F, sorry, Control R hyphen minify. Okay, now just want to show the switch between the namespaces, right? We are in dev namespaces. We have a resource called pod called nginx under dev namespace, correct? Now, how do I switch to the different namespace to check the resources? Let's see. What I will do, I will set a context, Control R, set context, right? So I'll switch dev to default, right? default. Now this context is modified, right? Now I'm gonna check the namespace that I've switched from dev to default namespace, correct? Then how do we check the default namespace's resources? Let's see. kubectl get pods, right? Are we able to see the resources under default namespace?
No, sir.
That means where we created under dev namespace the resource called pod. Means now we were able to understand this namespace concept and the pod concept here. We will be having, suppose if you run kubectl get an S, right? So there are the namespaces which are available here under default, under dev and kube node list. These are all the, apart from dev, the rest of the namespaces which are available default in your Kubernetes cluster. And when we switch between the namespaces, we will create resources under particular namespace to maintain our resources under particular namespace. We created our resource under dev namespace, right? We are nothing will be having any of the resources will not be having in default. We will be having in dev, right? Now let's switch to the dev namespace. So how do we switch? Here, instead of default, you point dev. The context is modified. Then you can run kubectl get pods. Here you have a pod running, the spin up pod, right? Now, kubectl get pods is the command to get the pod status, right? Now, how do we check the pod logs? Correct, right? So there is a command to check followed by the pod name, right? To list pod. Yes. Used to list the pods. Used to create a pod. Okay. And there is a command to get the pod logs, kubectl describe pods followed by pod name. Okay. Used to check the logs. Check the logs. Okay. Now let's run this to check the logs. kubectl describe pods. Okay. So if that is the case, what is our pod name? What is our pod name?
Nginx.
Correct. Let's copy this. Let's put it here. Let's describe the pod. See, here you can see all the where I ran the command here. You can see the pod which is created pod name, and this pod is under which namespace? Dev namespace, and the priority is 0, and the service account is default because we will be having the default service account. Okay, and the node which you have minikube cluster, and the started time is this, and the labels is there is no labels, and annotations is nothing under annotations, and the status is running. The IP of what?
Pod.
Correct, right? So what I said in the pod statement here, where it went here, it is a package of containerized application, right? So what you will see here, what is your application? Nginx, right? Nginx is the containerized application that we are deploying in terms of pod. Your pod contains your image, Docker image. Okay, here you can see the containers specification, right? So your Nginx is an application, container ID, and then image that we appointed, and the image ID, right? Correct, right? So this is what it pulls when we configure in the pod. Similarly, the ports here and the host port, the state is running. It started on Friday, so on time, and ready. If it this statement instead of true, if it is false, something you are crashing with your pod. Either you need to check your container, either you need to check your image, and either you need to check your pod configuration. Okay, there is no here is a restart count every second. If it is 0, it is restarting every second. Okay, and this is very important. Mounts, your mount will be under this. Here you can see kube API access, and under /var run secrets kubernetes.io, your service account from this. Okay, so this is the mounts that it automatically takes under mounts. Okay, and here you can see the conditions, the pod conditions, type, and the status. Okay, here pod ready to starts container. These conditions under status are always should be true. Initialized true, ready true, containers ready to, pod scheduler to. Okay, see this under conditions, under type, these are all the type that the checks we call it as. Under status, it should be always true. Okay, and under volumes, there are the volumes which creates default, and we can also customize these volumes. Sorry, here volumes. Okay, the token expiration seconds. After this, your token will get expired in 3607 seconds, and config map name kube root ca.crt. These are all the configuration when we want to have the customized configuration. We can write it in the YAML, else it will take the default one. Okay, and here is the events. This is very important. Under events, we should see type, reason, and the age, from, and the message. Okay, let's debug. Let's see what it is having. See, whatever you do, create any of the application, any of the services, any of the component in any tool, you should see the logs, correct? And you need to understand. Whenever you install Jenkins, you need to see the logs. Whenever you do run some command, check the logs. The logs will help you to debug, correct? When we are creating an application, we should also learn to debug any of the concept. Similarly, here we do have an event name under type normal, the reason scheduled, age which we created a pod under 4 minutes ago from default scheduler, right? What is the function of scheduler that we have? What is the function of scheduler? Kube scheduler. Scheduler identifies for newly created pod that should select on which node to be deployed, right? Correct, right? So as soon as the pod created, it selects the particular node to be deployed, because the pod is created inside the node only, right? In our case, what is the node here? What is the node? Node is here. right? You're able to see the node. As soon as we ran kubectl apply -f, it selects the node. This is done by kube scheduler. You were able to understand this architecture with the component that we're going to use, right? Scheduler. Scheduler function, scheduler identifies for newly created pod that should select on which node to be deployed. So as soon as when we run kubectl apply -f, it will select a node on this. Inside this node, your pod will be getting spinned up. Spinned up of which pod? Your Nginx pod. Of which namespace? In dev namespace. You getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Clear
Yes,
with
sir.
it? Okay. Now, how do we? Okay. As of now, we have checked the logs. So from this log, we get to know that we are able to see the logs, right? Now, once you create a pod, how do we log in? Correct? Correct, right? So similarly, how do we log into the container? That we know already. We use little modified command, kubectl. Can you go on mute, Bari Sagar? Okay, so we use a little modified command similar to Docker container, kubectl exec -it. Okay, so followed by what? Pod name, right? Pod name. What is our pod name? Nginx, right? Nginx -space /bin/bash, because it is in terms of bash only, right? Because we use our containers in Linux only, right? So let's run this. You will see the Nginx pod that you logged in. You are able to see the difference, right? Here compared, you are in server currently, right? So inside our server, we created a pod by deploying pod.yml and by applying kubectl apply -f followed by the pod.yml. From that, we created a pod here. And how do we log in? kubectl exec -it followed by the pod name -- space. Don't forget to put a space between hyphen and the slash bin bash. Correct? Now we logged in as a root under Nginx. We are in Nginx pod now. You're able to understand this. If you do ls, this is the empty configuration that you can see. If you want to switch to the /home, you can go here and you can run OMI, right? You are in root. So how do we switch to your normal user? Sudo su -ubuntu, right? Sorry, su -ubuntu. Let's see. There is no user. Okay, so you will have to check that you are already in the root user. Suppose if you want to check anything under root or maybe under home, you can go back to again root, do ls. You can run. You will be having all the, these are all the configuration files, right? Similarly, we wanted to see in the containers, right? Similarly, we see in the pod. Getting my point here? I'll copy this command, pod name followed by the bin bash used to log into the pod. Okay. Used to log into pod. Okay. So instead of this, I'm gonna give pod name. Okay. Clear with this. Okay. So, okay. Now there is also a command called, we can also check the resource. Okay, before moving to that, any questions and any doubts, guys? Any doubts, any questions? Pankaja. Pankaja,
Yes, sir.
you're able to understand.
Yes, sir.
What is Nginx here?
Um,
Have you created your AWS account?
yes, sir.
Can you share your screen?
Yes.
Okay, let's go with others. Are you guys able to understand? And I just wanted to get the questions here. Any questions and any doubts, guys?
So when we are creating this YAML file, right? We are in the we are creating the pod of Nginx. So how does it configure with the container?
Here we are pointing our container name, right? Container name and the image name and
Yes,
the
sir.
port. What
So
is your
this-
question?
So like how does the Nginx get created? The web server, I'm asking.
See, this pulls the automatic, the remote from Nginx container. I mean, from the remote. So when we point to this container in terms of Nginx, this pulls from remotely. That's
Okay.
how we do create. Suppose instead of this, instead of Nginx, you can also create Jenkins, but that should be available in your locally. So as of now, it pulls from the remotely, from the Docker community.
Okay.
Okay. Can you guys create a pod for Jenkins? And can you spin up a pod? I'll give an assignment today.
Okay.
And whatever the Docker containers that you created till today, right? You created the container for Jenkins, created for Maven, Tomcat, and Git, right? You created some 5 to 6 containers, right? So can you create a pod for the same Docker container by pointing here? Anyways, you will be having the container created locally. And whenever you are spinning up a pod, your container, your image should be available in locally, right? So suppose if you want to pull it remotely, also you can use.
Okay.
Okay. So again, any questions and any doubts, guys? Anything that you want to understand? And
Always the file name should be pod.yaml, or you can give
yes,
any
yes.
file name.
No. Always the file name, the extension should be always pod.yaml. Instead of pod, when you are creating a deployment.yaml. Instead of deployment and pod, when you're creating service, you will be having service.yaml. Instead of those, when you're creating your namespace.yaml. Any of the services we use in YAML format.
Okay. And you said the Docker image should be available in our local, right?
Yeah.
How to provide the local image name? Do we need to provide the path or something?
No. Directly you can point. So let's exit this. Exit the pod. So, okay. So how you will get the image by running Docker PS, right?
Yeah.
So here, this is the image for Minikube. Okay. Similarly, instead of this, when you run Docker PS, your images should be available. When we point under cat pod.yml, when you point your image name, which is available locally, say like this image is saying instead of this, your Nginx, you're pointing this name here. And inside the spec, our container spec, the container name, again, you are pointing your container name here and the image name, which we wanted to use. Where is the image name? This. Say like it's an image of your Nginx. You will point it, that name is here. And the port, when you are exposing that port that you are configuring Docker image, that port you are pointing here.
Okay.
You getting this?
Yes. Yes.
That's how we do the configuration.
And also, you said pods will have their own IP.
Exactly.
Is the IP configurable?
Yeah.
I mean, can we provide that?
Yes. I'll show the IP. To check the IP address with the wide output. To know the pod status with the wide output, kubectl get pods -o output in wide. Okay. This will list the pod in a detailed way. So if I run this, you will see the Nginx name. Let's run it here. Nginx name pod, and then ready 1/1. Status is running. Restarts 0th second. Age 20 minute. The IP. Here you can see the pod IP, right? And the node which picks Minikube. And here you can see the nominated node and the readiness gates. They are not available currently. You leave it as it is. You can see the IP here.
Yeah, this IP is by default the system has given, right?
No.
Is it
Yeah,
possible to over?
Yeah. When we are having the customized dedicated pods, dedicated clusters that we have, we can assign this pod IP. Depends on the CIDR block that we configured. We pick it from CIDR block and we assign it to the pod. Because
Okay.
everything is under our control only when we are having the controlled applications, that Kubernetes cluster. We can assign it. As of now, currently it assigns automatically. And whenever we want to assign a particular IP to the particular pod, which is purchased from our any cloud from the CIDR block, we assign it to the particular IP to the pod.
Okay.
Clear? So I'll give this command also. I wanted to show this after your doubts and questions. Anyways, this used to check the detailed logs of pod. See, my statements are very simple and easy and understandable way. When you want to go for more statements, more to fix, don't mug up any statements, okay? Better to be this statement. When they said elaborate those, you just write this simple ML configuration and explain them. That's it. He will get to know that you worked on it. And you can refer any AI or Google to get more info, because I use only the simple statement when they asked only to elaborate. And always don't stick on to the single statement. Whenever we're asking the stages in Jenkins, don't say that clone, build, test, and deploy. You should elaborate that, okay? We will expect more statements from you. Pooja.
Awesome.
Okay. I think might be you know that what happened yesterday's Q&A,
Yes.
right? So we want some elaborated statement when we are talking about the stages in any of the CI pipelines. Okay. So we want the complete clear state. See, you can ask the doubts. We are there you to help on the concept that you are not understood, or whenever you want to learn something, you can ask me. But when we are asking questions, you should be ready to tell the answers with all the concept. Any questions and any doubts, guys? I think it's 8:41. Let's wind up the session. I think some people want to go to office, right? Anyways, any questions and any doubts, guys? Again.
Sandeep, if I'm keeping that in that container in a pod, so that should be created in Docker and should be running.
Yes, correct. That should be running only.
If
Your
that
image
is,
should be running and your container should be running.
okay, means if that is image is created, but it is not running, means it is exited. What
Okay.
it will happen here?
No, if that is the case, you will not see the status as running. If that is the case, it will create a pod. But if that is the case, it will see the status as exited here. Then you need to troubleshoot your container in Docker fix the Docker container perspective, then come to Kubernetes, then again spin up a pod.
Okay.
Okay, so this looks you are debugging in the container, debug the pod, fixing it. Okay, that's how we need to work on that. Getting it?
Yes.
Means Sandeep, that container should be running in
Yes.
the Docker. Okay.
Exactly. The container should be running in your Docker. So when you in the same platform only, when you run your Docker PS, you should be able to see the container that you created.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. Any questions, any doubts again? Dipesh, Sagar, is Dipesh joined?
Yes, sir.
Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay. So let's wind up the session. We'll connect tomorrow. Let's have a discussion tomorrow on your doubts and questions. Let's discuss more concepts in Kubernetes. Okay. I'll do share these notes in the group. You can make a note. Let's connect tomorrow same time. Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks.